Let's go, go. It's a brand new morning. Rise up to a brand new dawning. As the passion start to rise. The energy.
Welcome back to Good Morning Tobago on Tobago Updates, viewers. Now, another thing that's within our space that we don't ever give, I won't say we don't ever, but we don't give enough attention to, it's what's happening on our coral reefs or in our shorelines around. And there's quite a lot happening, quite a lot not good happening with the effects of climate change and pollution, a whole lot of other things. And to just give us a perspective on that, we are going to be speaking with Dr. Kandace, who is a research officer of the Coral Reef Ecology in Coral Reef Ecology Department of the Institute of Marine Affairs. So a special good morning and welcome to you, Dr. Kandace.
Good morning, Kandace. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can. So,
Brilliant.
the IMA has been engaged over the past couple of years in what is called the Marin Tobago project. It's a project that, well, actually, I'll give you a chance to explain a little bit about what the project is aimed at before we get into some more conversations about it.
Thanks. So, Marin Tobago, or the Marine Resilience Initiative Tobago, was a pilot project. It was an 18-month pilot project where we were, well, considering the future of uncertainty as it relates to climate change. You know, our reefs are going to be more prone to coral bleaching, more storm events, more disease outbreaks. So we thought we needed to start assessing the feasibility of, resilience-based management and restoration, and how can that be applied to Tobago. So the last 18 months was essentially starting that groundwork of understanding and research to determine, if we were to do restoration, what would that look like in Tobago and how should we go about it?
Mm-hmm. And there's quite a lot that you guys formed because you focus on coral reefs as well as seagrass beds. I want to focus on coral reefs first because that's one thing that we are all familiar with. And there were 5 areas of study which you guys engaged in, and that was at Buku Reef, Flying Reef, Mount Irvin, Boobsey Island in Charlottesville, and on Speyside, the Angel
Angel
Reef,
Reef.
right?
Yeah.
And what you guys found was that some of the corals are not quite as resilient as you might hope.
Exactly. So what we tried to do is we assessed their current state of health, and then we assessed it in a framework of resilience, meaning how well it will do in terms of future disturbances, right? And we use a lot of what we say ecological indicators to determine that. So we look at things like hard coral cover, coral diversity, if there's a lot of disease on the reef, if there are a lot of new coral recruits or baby corals, that would then contribute to future populations. And what we found was that there were a lot of, especially Flying Reef along the south coast, did not perform very well. We ranked the sites, so it was the lowest ranking in terms of resilience. However, there were sites that can fare better, and we can actually apply restoration and get them to a good, healthy standard to be able to be more resilient to things like climate change. And those sites would have been Mount Irvin Reef and Booby Island and potentially even Buko in the marine park.
Mm-hmm. And then one of the positive things that you noticed was there was some coral spawning on the reef. And could you just give our viewers a little bit of an understanding of what coral spawning is and what that means for our reefs?
Yes. So that was the second objective, was that if we were to do restoration, we wanted to do a restoration strategy that focused on building genetic diversity or variability in the current populations. And to do that, we had to focus on the sexual reproduction of corals, which means that each new young would be slightly different and hopefully would be able to fare better against any kind of disturbance. And so to do that, we were looking at larval propagation strategies. And the first step in that was understanding when our corals spawn. So coral spawning is essentially when the corals release their gametes, so their sperm and eggs, so that they mix in the water column, and there's fertilization in the water column so that new corals form and then they settle on the reef. This happens at a specific season in the year. So In the Caribbean, corals start spawning, depending on the species, from anywhere between May till October. And then you have certain species that peak in their coral spawning. What was exciting for us was that we never really monitored coral spawning in that detail in Trinidad and Tobago. So we worked with our colleagues from Secor to sort of monitor between July and October consecutively to see, when did they spawn, what species were commonly spawning. And so a lot of that would guide what we decide to do or what species we would focus on when it came to that form of restoration. It was really exciting because even for us, I've never really experienced spawning to that degree, and we were able to get volunteers out to see it with us. So.
Certainly. But how can this add to our resilience efforts? And I so want you to talk to that in light of all the other challenges that we're facing there in terms of pollution, sediments, rising sea temperatures, the risks of coral bleaching. How does that fare against those factors?
Yeah, so restoration doesn't work outside of management, right? And so I think one of the biggest take homes leading out of the pilot is that we need to work as much on management, and specifically management that focuses on climate adaptation, right? So in the next phase, we're trying to build a framework where restoration works within that pathway of decision making, of the type of management, and that all depends on our vision of how we want our coral reefs to fare and how we want to continue to benefit in terms of livelihoods and whatnot. So essentially, coral reefs are one of the most vulnerable ecosystems on the planet, and it is a hard task. And so we hope that we can do a lot more, not just in maximizing, hey, if we were to do restoration in this part, on this reef, it'll be more likely to survive better than another one. We also have to manage activities of those reefs as well. So if there was to be any restoration activity, we would have to work with community. We would have to work with reducing land-based sources of pollution, which is a major threat to coral reefs, especially in Tobago, and also work on things like fisheries management that will go along with reef health, and then also go along with the health of fisheries as well.
And I mean, as we're speaking a bit about pollution, us in here in Tobago, sometimes we don't think about what happens to the water that we let off into our drains. And I wanted to take us through that and explain exactly what are you noticing on the reefs, especially in those areas where the water courses directly enter the beaches and so on, and just a variation in the coral health.
Yeah. So any kind of runoff from all our drains, unfortunately, lead to our ocean. So we have issues with our sewage management, but also with our grey water, which is our household detergents, the runoff from our laundry, our sinks. A lot of that, unfortunately, still gets into our drains, and that flushes directly into the ocean. Those detergents have chemicals like reactive phosphates and nitrogen, which encourages blooming of algae, but also encourages blooming of microbes. And those microbes are what causes diseases in corals. So imagine when it's raining and your mother tells you shouldn't bathe in the muddy water, or you shouldn't go in the sea because it's all dirty. It's for those similar reasons. We don't want to get a disease, and we don't want to be, impacted by the waste, but the corals can't move. So they do get exposed to that high level of microbes. And then when you have the combination of a warming planet, the warmer waters plus the nutrients results in significant blooms of microorganisms and algae. With respect to Tobago, we realize that sediment is a huge issue. So when you think about land clearing activities, when we don't think about when we should do land clearing activities and what kind of buffers we should have, right? So ideally avoid clearing land in the rainy season where the runoff of the topsoil will be the highest. So these are the issues that we need to actually nail down and strategize. How can we improve it? We don't want to prevent development. We need it to align with our marine resources and our livelihoods.
And if we don't do anything soon enough, what are the projections? If things continue as it is, what are the projections and what's the impact on our lives?
So the projections are dire, although we need to have better models for our specific region and our islands. So one of the projections that we've been looking at, the worst case scenario, which is not exactly the projection we're on, but essentially there will be a point where we would experience severe coral bleaching so frequently that the corals would not be able to recover. So imagine if you get a bleaching every 1 or 2 years, corals are not going to be able to reproduce properly. They're not going to have viable young, and that would just, trigger a downward spiral in terms of coral populations. And what that means for us is that we benefit. Well, so corals house the highest biodiversity in the oceans, and we, being in the Caribbean and Tobago, we are lined by coral reefs, and a lot of our livelihoods are fishing activities. It's a major food source. It's a major form of recreation for us. We love to go, whether it is just beach bathing or snorkeling. It is a fundamental part of our culture. And I think we need to be able to connect the dots full circle to understand, if we were to continue to benefit from it, we have to work to conserve it.
Certainly. And what about in terms of if we lose the coral reefs, will we still be able to enjoy the clear beaches that we are so privileged to have here in Tobago?
Unfortunately, also contribute to things like coastal protection, and especially in the southwest Tobago, where most of our popular beaches are, the ecosystem of corals naturally provide beautiful white sand through the grazing of the algae and the reef surfaces by parrotfish and other herbivores. The growth of the corals provide that shelter. So Pigeon Point, for example, it's one of the most popular beach destinations in Tobago, and it's protected by the barrier that the Bucca Reef is formed. Unfortunately, with the degradation of the reef, that barrier reef is no longer going to be able to provide that sheltered area for that lagoon. And so you have concerns in terms of our tourism, in terms of our well-being and our recreation.
Mm-hmm. So, what's the future of the Marin Tobago project? What's going to be happening in the next few years?
So fortunately, we managed to get to maintain our partnership with BP, and we have funding for the next 5 years to be able to actually start implementing different strategies. So we have three main pillars of activities. The first one is building ocean sustainability, and that is actually working to create a resilience network for Tobago, which we will discuss with partners, THA, persons that work in the marine environment, to come up with a vision of what management in Tobago looks like. It must be informed and it must be enacted by the people that work in the marine environment, including IMA. So it's just sort of trying to come up with a vision and overcoming the major challenges to management, whether it is building capacity in terms of enforcement, whether it is an education or an understanding. It all depends on where we see the challenges or where the stakeholders see the challenges. And we're trying to overcome those major, prioritize and overcome them one by one through the next 5 years. The second pillar focuses on actually establishing some restoration and coral reefs in Tobago. And based on the pilot, we have sites that we will work with our international partner, Secor, to restore some coral species on sites that we deem would have better success. And then the third pillar is essentially working on building ocean stewardship. So building education and awareness of our ocean backyards, and just sort of highlighting, as I said, creating that full circle of understanding of how we benefit and how we should conserve so that we can sustain our benefits into the future. So they include like developing classroom tools, because I think understanding your marine environment from childhood is key.
Yes.
And there is a major focus to do that.
Certainly. All right, so Dr. Ganesh, we are almost at we're pretty much at the end of our conversation this morning. I want to thank you so much for being on, for sharing this perspective. But before you go, I just want you to just take a minute just to speak to Tobago about, just why we really need to be paying closer attention to what's really going on, and what what we can do just to make it better.
Yes. I think essentially coral reefs coral reefs in a lot of our marine ecosystems are out of sight and out of mind. So the first step is basically closing that gap. And I would encourage Tobago and its trainees to get to learn their environment, to experience their environment a bit more, learn how to swim, learn how to snorkel, start seeing what is under there and start understanding because especially with climate change, things are happening more rapidly, especially with the coral reefs and this degradation. So there's an urgent need to act. And it all comes down to simple action and from what you do in your homes, what you do on the beaches, to be responsible with your waste. Waste management is a critical key, but we also need to advocate as community members for our government to do more in terms of waste management, in terms of marine management, because we know that we're so dependent on our environment. So advocate more, be ocean stewards, and then learn to explore your marine environments.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ganesh. It was such a pleasure speaking with you this morning. And we are definitely looking forward to seeing the success of your research. And hopefully we could find a good resilience mechanism for both coral reefs. And well, we didn't touch on the seagrass, which is also important, but that could be a conversation for another day. So thank you so much.
Definitely. Thanks, Candace, for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, great. Well, viewers, I want to thank you so much for being on with us, for sticking with us throughout the whole program for this morning. It was certainly a pleasure. So I just hope you have a safe and wonderful day, and we would see you again tomorrow. But don't forget, we have brunch coming up with at 10 with Janelle. So you're gonna want to lock on for that and see what she has for a taste of Tobago. So don't get it. So see you then.
We are people in the sun.